My parents showed up without warning and demanded I wake up my exhausted husband. When I refused, they got angry and tried to force me. So I kicked them out of my house. Now everyone says I was disrespectful, but I was just protecting my peace and my marriage." The sun was setting over the quiet suburban street as Rachel pulled into the driveway, her eyes immediately drawn to the familiar shape of her husband's truck. She felt a peculiar mix of relief and annoyance. Relief that he had finally come home, and annoyance that he was home so early. Rachel knew the toll the last 3 weeks had taken on him. The late nights, the unending pressure, the exhaustion that painted shadows beneath his eyes like a dark, persistent fog. She sighed, grabbed her purse, and stepped out of the car, her feet feeling heavier than usual. At 29 weeks pregnant, even a simple trip to the store was a marathon. Walking up to the front door, Rachel's hand paused on the handle, her stomach rumbling. She had picked up a surprise dinner for two, hoping it would be a small token of appreciation for the monumental task her husband, Mark, had just completed. But she didn't know how to approach the situation. Mark had been working like a machine, barely taking breaks to eat or sleep, and she didn't want to disturb his much-deserved rest. Inside, the house was eerily still. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick a reminder of the time that kept slipping away from them. Rachel placed the bag of food on the kitchen counter and tiptoed upstairs, her heart racing. She peeked into the bedroom, the room bathed in a soft, golden light from the setting sun. Mark lay there, fully clothed, his tie loose around his neck, and his shoes still on. His chest rose and fell in a deep, rhythmic pattern that signaled a much-needed sleep. Rachel felt a pang of pity for him. The sight of Mark, her rock, looking so vulnerable stirred something in Rachel. Before she could decide what to do next, the sound of the doorbell pierced the silence. She froze, her hand hovering over her belly, and then forced herself to move. Who could it be? The only people who visited them unannounced were her parents. Rachel took a deep breath and hoped it wasn't them. The last thing she needed was their judgmental gazes and unwanted advice. But as she approached the door, her fears were confirmed. There they stood, her mother with a faux smile plastered on her face and her father looking stern, holding a bouquet of flowers that screamed guilt trip. Rachel took a step back, her mind racing. "Hi, Mom, Dad," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What brings you guys by?" Her mother stepped in, the sweet scent of her perfume filling the room. "We just wanted to check on you, honey. You know, with the baby coming and all." She glanced around, her eyes settling on the bag of takeout. "Did Mark finally come home early?" Rachel nodded, her jaw clenching. "He did, but he's sleeping. He's had a really long few weeks, and he needs his rest." Her father's expression softened slightly, but her mother's did not. "Rachel, it's not good for you to be alone like this, especially in your condition. And what about dinner?" Rachel felt her patience slipping away. "I've got it under control," she said firmly. "Mark just needs some time to recover." Her parents exchanged a look, one she recognized all too well. It was the look that said they knew better. "Rachel, we're just worried about you," her mother began, but Rachel cut her off. "I appreciate your concern, but I can handle it. Please, let him sleep." Rachel's voice was tight, the exhaustion of her own marathon of managing the house and her pregnancy while supporting Mark bubbling to the surface. Her parents didn't move, and Rachel felt the first stirrings of anger. Before she could say anything more, the sound of a door opening echoed through the house. Mark's footsteps grew louder as he descended the stairs, his eyes squinting in the sudden brightness of the living room. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she saw him, his face etched with fatigue, but his eyes lighting up when he saw her. "Hey, babe," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "I'm sorry, did I miss something?" Rachel's parents turned to face him, and Rachel stepped aside, watching as her mother's eyes widened in surprise. She knew that look. It was the same look she had given Rachel when she had called to tell them about Mark's promotion. Rachel felt a flicker of satisfaction, knowing that her mother had not expected to find Mark home at all, let alone sleeping. "Mark," her father said gruffly, "you can't just leave Rachel to do everything around here, especially now." Mark's smile faltered, and Rachel could see the exhaustion in his eyes deepen. "I know, Dad, but we're fine. Rachel's been amazing, and I just needed to catch up on some sleep." Her mother's expression softened, and Rachel felt a twinge of gratitude. Maybe, just maybe, they would leave it alone. But she knew better than to hold her breath. Her family was like a tornado, leaving chaos in its wake, and she was tired of being the one to clean up the mess. "Look," she said, placing a hand on her husband's shoulder. "We're both tired, and we just want to spend some quiet time together. I promise we'll come over for dinner soon. But right now, we need some space." Her parents exchanged another look, but this time it was one of understanding. They murmured their goodbyes, and Rachel closed the door behind them with a sigh of relief. She turned to Mark, who was looking at her with a mix of admiration and bewilderment. "Thanks for having my back," he said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. Rachel wrapped her arms around him, feeling the baby kick in response. "Always," she whispered, as they made their way back upstairs, leaving the tension of the day behind them. When Mark woke up, it was almost dinner time. Rachel had set the table with the food she had brought home earlier, the aroma of garlic and rosemary wafting through the house. She had hoped that the scent would coax him out of sleep, but he had slept through it all. She watched him blink the sleep from his eyes, his gaze sweeping the room as if to reassure himself he was home. Rachel felt a surge of love and frustration. How could she be annoyed with him when she knew the burden he had just lifted from his shoulders? "I made your favorite," she said softly, pointing to the steaming plate of chicken parmesan. "I figured you'd be tired." Mark managed a weak smile and sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I can't believe I slept that long," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. Rachel handed him a glass of water and a pillow to prop against his back. They sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the clinking of silverware and the occasional sigh from Rachel's swollen feet. She knew he was still processing the events of the last few weeks, and she didn't want to pressure him into talking if he wasn't ready. After dinner, Rachel suggested they take a walk around the block. The fresh air would do them both good, she reasoned, and it would give them some much-needed alone time. As they strolled slowly, Mark finally opened up. "I've never felt so drained," he confessed. "But it's done now. We saved the company millions." Rachel could see the pride in his eyes, despite the dark circles beneath them. "I'm so proud of you," she said, squeezing his hand, "and I know it wasn't easy." He nodded. "I couldn't have done it without you." Rachel felt a warmth spread through her, knowing that despite everything, their partnership remained unshaken. The rest of the evening was spent in quiet companionship, the TV playing a mindless sitcom in the background as they both succumbed to the lure of a peaceful night in. Rachel's mind drifted to the baby, who was now more active than ever, and the future that awaited them. Despite the challenges they had faced, she knew they would tackle them together, as a team. When they climbed back into bed, Rachel nestled against Mark's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. The baby kicked again, a gentle reminder of the life they had created together. As sleep claimed her, Rachel felt a sense of contentment that had eluded her for weeks. For now, the crisis was over, and their little family could finally start to breathe again. But she also knew that this was just the first of many battles they would face together, and she was ready for them, as long as Mark was by her side. The following days were a blur of lazy mornings and quiet evenings, both Rachel and Mark savoring the sudden influx of free time. Rachel's belly grew larger, and Mark took great pleasure in feeling their child move beneath his hand, his eyes lighting up with wonder each time. Rachel found herself watching him, marveling at the transformation from exhausted workaholic to devoted husband and soon-to-be father. But the peace was shattered when Rachel's phone buzzed with messages from her siblings and aunts, all echoing the same accusation. She was selfish for kicking their parents out of the house. Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach as she read through the texts, each one a small dagger to her heart. She had thought her family would support them, not tear them apart. She knew she had done the right thing, but the doubt was like a persistent itch she couldn't scratch away. Mark, sensing her tension, took her hand. "You know I've got your back, right?" he said, his voice low and steady. Rachel nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "But maybe we should talk to them," Mark suggested. "They're just worried," Rachel sighed, knowing he was right. They had to address the situation before it festered into a full-blown family feud. So, they decided to host a family dinner, an olive branch of sorts. Rachel spent the day preparing, her movements methodical and precise as she chopped vegetables and seasoned the roast. She wanted everything to be perfect, a visual representation of their unity in the face of adversity. As the family filtered in, Rachel's nerves grew taut, but she plastered on a smile, determined not to let their disapproval ruin the evening. Her mother was the first to arrive, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for signs of chaos. Rachel could almost hear the unspoken question, "Can she really handle this?" But Rachel was ready. She greeted her with a kiss on the cheek and a firm grip on her elbow, guiding her to the kitchen where the food was laid out. Mark's hand squeezed hers, a silent show of solidarity. As the night progressed, the conversation remained polite, skirting around the elephant in the room. Rachel could feel the tension coiling tighter and tighter until it was almost palpable. Finally, she took a deep breath and decided to address the issue head-on. "I know everyone's upset about what happened the other day," she began, her voice clear and steady. "But Mark and I just needed some time alone. We've been through a lot, and we need to support each other, especially now." She paused, looking around the table, her gaze landing on each family member in turn. "I hope you all understand that." There was a moment of silence, and then Rachel's mother spoke. "We do, Rachel. We just want what's best for you and the baby. We know Mark's been working hard, and we're sorry for overstepping." Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Maybe, Just maybe, they could move past this. The rest of the dinner was filled with laughter and stories, the tension slowly dissipating like fog in the morning sun. Rachel's heart swelled as she watched her family interact with Mark, their faces alight with affection. For the first time in weeks, Rachel felt a genuine sense of belonging. They might not always agree, but they were a family, and she knew they would always be there for each other. As the last guest left, Rachel turned to Mark, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." He pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and comforting. "You're my world, Rachel. Whatever comes our way, we'll face it together." Rachel leaned into him, her heart filled with love and hope for the future. They had survived this storm, and together, they could weather any others that life threw at them. The next week, Rachel was busy with doctor's appointments and preparing the nursery, her mind a whirlwind of excitement and nerves. Mark was back at work, but he had promised to keep his hours more reasonable, to be there for Rachel and their baby. She felt a sense of normalcy return to their lives, a gentle rhythm that had been lost in the chaos of the previous weeks. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, as Rachel was cooking dinner, the phone rang. It was Mark, his voice tight with tension. "Babe, I've got to go back in," he said. "There's another problem at work, and they need me." Rachel's grip on the spatula tightened, her knuckles white. "But you just got back," she protested, her voice trembling slightly. I know," he said, his voice heavy with apology. "It's just for a couple of days. We can't let this happen again. I'll make it up to you, I promise." Rachel felt a wave of anger and disappointment wash over her, but she took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, go," she said, trying to keep the wobble out of her voice. "Do what you have to do." As the days turned into nights and Mark's visits home grew shorter and fewer, Rachel felt the weight of their situation bear down on her. She missed him desperately, the house feeling eerily quiet without his presence. The baby's movements grew stronger, a constant reminder of the life they had created, a life that was growing and changing without him there to witness it. The second night, Rachel woke up to the sound of the door opening, her heart racing. She peered into the darkness, expecting to see Mark's silhouette, but instead, she found her mother standing in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice a gentle caress. Rachel sat up, her pregnant belly heavy and uncomfortable. "What are you doing here?" Rachel hissed, her annoyance palpable. "I told you to respect our privacy." Her mother's smile didn't waver. "I know, sweetheart, but I couldn't resist. Your father and I wanted to make sure you weren't overdoing it. And we brought cookies." She held out a Tupperware container filled with the sweet scent of chocolate chip cookies, Rachel's favorite. Rachel's resolve crumbled, and she couldn't help but laugh. "Okay, Mom, you win. Just don't wake Mark up." They sat in the dim light of the bedside lamp, munching on cookies and talking about the baby. Rachel felt a warmth spread through her chest, the bond between them strengthening despite their recent disagreement. Her mother's eyes gleamed with excitement, and Rachel realized that she hadn't seen her this happy in a long time. It was strange, but comforting, to be the center of her mother's world again. As the conversation turned to the nursery, Rachel's mother offered to help with the final preparations. Rachel hesitated, but the idea of having her mother's experienced hand was too tempting to refuse. Plus, it would give them a chance to reconnect, to find a balance between Rachel's need for independence and her mother's desire to be involved. The next day, Rachel's mother arrived bright and early, a toolbox and paint samples in hand. They worked side by side, their laughter echoing through the house as they painted the nursery walls a soft shade of blue. Rachel watched as her mother transformed the space, her movements sure and efficient. Despite her annoyance, Rachel felt a swell of gratitude. But the peace was not to last. Mark's texts grew shorter and less frequent, and Rachel could feel the stress seeping back into their lives. She tried not to let it show, focusing on the nursery and the baby, but the anxiety gnawed at her. What if Mark couldn't keep his promise? What if the company's crisis never ended? The third night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the quiet house, her thoughts racing. Her hand found her phone, and she scrolled through the messages from her siblings, still filled with accusations and disappointment. Rachel felt a tear slide down her cheek, the weight of it all pressing down on her. She missed her husband, missed the way he would hold her and make everything feel right again. With a sigh, she slid out of bed and padded downstairs to the kitchen. The house was dark except for the flickering light from the fridge. Rachel grabbed a jar of pickles and a bottle of water, her latest pregnancy craving. As she sat at the table, she heard the garage door open, and her heart leaped. Mark was home. He walked in, his eyes bloodshot and his suit rumpled, looking every bit the weary warrior. Rachel's anger and frustration melted away, and she rushed to him, her arms wrapping around his neck. "You're home," she breathed into his ear, her voice thick with emotion. Mark held her tightly, his body trembling with exhaustion. "I had to come home," he murmured. "I couldn't stay away any longer." Rachel felt a tear fall onto her shoulder, and she knew he was just as scared and overwhelmed as she was. They stood there for a moment, their hearts beating in sync, before Rachel stepped back. "Come on," she said, taking his hand. "Let's go to bed. We'll figure everything out in the morning." In the quiet darkness of their room, Rachel lay beside Mark, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. His arm was draped protectively over her, the baby kicking gently between them. Rachel knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as a family. And that was all that truly mattered. The next morning, Rachel awoke to the sound of Mark's alarm, his grip on her tightening briefly before he realized it was time to get up. He groaned and rolled over, and Rachel couldn't help but smile. He had promised to work from home today, a rare treat they hadn't had in weeks. She watched him stumble into the bathroom, his exhaustion etched into his features, and felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. As Mark showered, Rachel made breakfast, the smell of pancakes and bacon filling the house. She knew that food was the best way to his heart, and she hoped that it would give him the energy he needed to tackle the day ahead. When he emerged, his hair still damp and his eyes a little less bloodshot, Rachel served him a steaming plate with a side of fruit. They sat at the kitchen table, the sun streaming through the windows, and talked about their plans for the day. Mark had a few conference calls, but other than that, they were free to do as they liked. Rachel suggested a trip to the park, a place they used to go when they first started dating. Mark's face lit up, and Rachel felt a sense of nostalgia wash over her. It was as if the storm had passed, and they could finally enjoy the calm. They spent the day walking hand in hand, the baby bump between them a constant reminder of the love that had brought them here. Rachel felt a peace she hadn't felt in what felt like an eternity. They talked about the baby's name, the kind of parents they wanted to be, and the future they wanted to build. Mark promised to make more of an effort to balance work and family, and Rachel promised to be more understanding when he had to go in for long hours. The evening brought more family drama, however, when Rachel's phone buzzed with messages from her siblings, still upset about the dinner incident. Rachel sighed, setting her phone aside. "I'll deal with it later," she said, placing her hand over Mark's. "For now, let's just focus on us." Mark nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." Rachel looked into his eyes and knew he meant every word. They had faced challenges before, but this one was different. It was a test of their love, their strength, and their partnership. The following days were a mix of Mark working from home and Rachel managing the house and her pregnancy. They took short naps together when they could, stolen moments of peace in the chaos of their lives. Rachel felt a newfound respect for her husband, for the weight he carried, and the way he managed to still find joy in the little things. But as the weekend approached, Rachel noticed that Mark's texts from work were growing more frequent, the stress lines on his forehead deepening. Rachel knew that the company crisis wasn't over, that it was a persistent thorn in their side. Yet she also knew that Mark would do whatever it took to provide for their growing family. One night, as Rachel lay in bed, she felt a sudden, sharp pain in her lower back. She gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. The baby was moving, but it felt different. Rachel sat up, her heart racing. Mark looked over, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" Rachel took a deep breath, trying to ignore the panic that was slowly creeping in. "It's just the baby. I think I'm having Braxton Hicks contractions." Mark's eyes widened, and Rachel could see the fear in them. "It's okay," she assured him. "They're just practice contractions. But maybe we should talk to the doctor, just to be safe." Mark nodded, his hand reaching for hers. "Let's do it first thing in the morning." Rachel lay back down, feeling his warmth beside her. She closed her eyes and listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, the sound of their baby's heartbeat in the background. The next day at the doctor's office, Rachel felt a sense of relief wash over her as the doctor confirmed that everything was normal. The contractions were indeed just Braxton Hicks, a common occurrence in the third trimester. Mark squeezed her hand tightly, his own fears momentarily abated.